For more on this, Rosa Freedman joins us on the program. She's a professor of law, conflict, and global development at the University of Reading in England. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So can you please start by giving us an idea of the scale of programs that is to be affected by these USAID cuts? What, in your view, is its most important work?
USAID takes the less than 1% of the GDP from the United States and delivers programs in 120 of 193 countries around the world. It's about 42% of global development aid that goes to these types of programs, whether they are clinics for women to give birth, schools in particular focus on girls' education, child safeguarding, healthcare, including retrovirals and drugs to prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS, vaccinations, and much, much more. What we see within those programs is that they are there to boost local economies, to help educate the next generation, particularly within global south countries, and to help to develop areas where previously there's been instability or conflict or chaos. And so there will be a huge impact within these programs, but also, as you said, a huge impact within the United States for the number of workers who have suddenly found themselves laid off without any sort of employment protections that we might expect to have in European countries.
So what do you expect to be the most immediate consequences then, those that will be or were already felt the quickest?
I mean, in the immediacy, these will be the consequences around health and around water and sanitation. We will see a rise in preventable diseases that could have been prevented through vaccinations, through things like providing tablets to purify water and prevent the spread of cholera. We'll see a rise in the number of HIV and AIDS cases over the coming years as a direct result of this. But we'll also see, as we always do, an impact on children and specifically on girls. There will be girls who are forced out of education when families have to decide whether to educate their boy children or girl children. There will be a massive impact on child safeguarding, on preventing sexual exploitation and abuse and trafficking and physical abuse and forced labor of children, because child safeguarding is at the heart of all of development work. But if there's no funding for it, then it very quickly falls by the wayside. And we will see a rise of insecurity around the world. Development aid is not there as charity. It is a way of redistributing the wealth of the world and of coming to terms with the colonial harms that have been caused, over many, many centuries, particularly in global south countries. It is a way to prevent conflict and insecurity and radicalization, and a way to ensure stability and economic prosperity in communities that would otherwise be prone to those types of conflicts and crises.
USAID is, of course, also an instrument of soft power. Do you think that it has had, I mean, you touched upon it briefly there, but do you really think that it's had that big of an influence in that sense, from a soft power perspective? And how might other powers step in to fill the gap that's left in its absence? What will that look like? And do you think it will be all negative?
USAID has been part of the soft power of the United States around the world for many decades. And we know that countries like China have stepped in on development in things like building roads, building trains, building buildings and banks, placing their own janitors into those buildings, whether they're janitors or whether they're agents of the state is up to your viewers to decide. But countries like that will step in further. But the aid that they provide will not be the kind of development with human rights that we expect from the United States and from European Union countries. Instead, they will provide that aid to governments to decide what they will do with it. And it is unlikely that those governments will prioritize people with disability, children, the most marginalized groups in their countries, and instead will probably use that money for infrastructure, thus leaving those poor and marginalized communities to fend for themselves. So this will have a big blow on the ground and an immediate impact to people, but it will also have a big blow to geopolitical shifts of power, with more countries looking to BRICS and also to European states. But let's remember that when Trump did this in his first presidency, the European Union looked very different. It was much more progressive. Canada was much more stable and was much more able and willing to step in and help to fund these programs. We're seeing a shift to the right across Europe, and it's unlikely that some of those countries will now step in to provide funding to keep these programs going.
So, Professor Friedman, USAID was, of course, established by Congress as an independent agency, which means, at least from a legal perspective, technically only Congress can fully dissolve it. It doesn't look like there's that much pushback, really, from Congress for now. So do you think that these moves will face legal obstacles? What permanent damage, to put it otherwise, can the Trump administration do to USAID?
Well, it seems unlikely that President Trump and his current administration care very much about legal challenges. What we're watching play out in front of us is some form of fascism. The president and the people around him are completely ignoring the laws and the constitution in the country and simply issuing executive orders that go far beyond their powers. And because they are doing this day after day, they're causing such chaos that it becomes very difficult for Congress to step in, or for the judiciary to have the time to step in to challenge these orders. What we can only hope for is that the Republican Party will take a look at what's going on and say this goes so far beyond the rule of law that it looks like fascism is creeping into this administration. Well, not really creeping into, is marching across Washington, and that it is time to step in and rein in President Trump. Whether or not he can be reined in is another matter. We've also have seen that there are a number of people who were released from the 6th of January insurrections who are now surrounding President Trump. And if they were to get any more power within his administration, there'll be questions whether the police and the army will support his presidency. And as we know, where there is fascism, it needs to have the police and army supporting it. It's incredibly unfortunate that we are talking about the United States, the so-called leader of the free world, in this way. But what we've seen over the past 10 days is completely shocking.
As a final question for you, Professor Friedman, I think a lot of Americans, and even people abroad for that matter, were quite surprised about the extent to which some communities are dependent on USAID. Do you think that the move by the Trump administration to gut it could actually just simply encourage leaders in countries where this aid is being distributed to be more efficient with their own resources, especially if you consider that some of the countries that benefit most from USAID money are amongst the wealthiest in terms of natural resources on the planet?
These countries might be the wealthiest in terms of natural resources, but we're talking about centuries and centuries of those countries being subjugated and oppressed and having those natural resources taken away. We're talking about supporting countries to transition to democracies and to address corruption. If we simply remove the aid from the ground, the governments in these countries aren't going to just provide that aid to those communities. What it will create is a sense of crisis and instability, which will lead to more conflicts around the world. This aid, as I said, isn't going out as charity. It's going out largely to keep the world stable and secure, largely to support economic prosperity and growth, so that there are transitions to democracies in these states and so that they become fully self-supporting in time. But you can't redress the harms of many centuries in just a matter of decades.
Rosa Freedman, with that, we'll have to conclude. Thank you so very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.